Being that the previous two patches were absolutely massive, Riot's toned it down a notch for 26.5 as it's going to be a smaller pro-focused patch with nerfs to Orianna, Azir, and Neeko. We've got a bunch of champion buffs as well, along with buffs to Locket and Hubris, so let's break everything down and provide you guys with a complete update to the solo queue tier list for every single role. And remember, if you're learning new tech, broken builds, or macro and wave control strategies from videos like this one, you're already behind. The issue with YouTube is that it takes a while for us to edit and get content out for you guys as fast as possible. That's why whenever our challenger players discover new tech, broken builds, or game-winning strategies, they post it immediately in our new meta updates course, weeks before you'll ever see it on YouTube, Reddit, or TikTok, so you can get ahead of everyone else. For instance, AP Varus top lane was broken from the very first patch of the season, but the average player didn't discover that until a few weeks later, while SkillCapped subscribers were notified before everyone else. As a SkillCapped subscriber, you're also getting access to our newly updated Essentials courses, covering everything you need to master Season 16 from fundamentals to advanced macro, or even our Bronze to Diamond series, where we document hard stuck players using only our content to climb through every rank. And if that wasn't enough already, every single week our challenger players upload 10 full game commentaries breaking down exactly how to carry games and your chosen champion in your elo, explaining every decision in real time. Best of all, you can get access to all this and more completely risk-free, as if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service, then you get every penny back. Check out the link in the description below for an exclusive one-time discount completely risk-free today. So we've got 2 items receiving buffs for this patch, and the first one up is Hubris. The cost of Hubris will be lowered from 3,000 to 2,800 gold. So nothing massive, but on champs like Kiana, Kayn, Graves, or Draven, if you end up getting an early lead, then going towards Hubris makes a lot more sense for 26.5. Draven and Graves in specific are 2 champions who are actually finding real good success rushing Hubris even prior to this buff, so they are the frontrunners to start picking up the item more moving forward. The second item buff for this patch is Locket, as Riot will be increasing the active shield value. In previous patches, the shield value would start scaling from level 1 and go from 200 scaling to 360 shielding. In 26.5, the shielding will now start scaling from level 8 and provide 290 scaling to 360 shielding. So basically what this means is that Locket will now be a stronger rush item. If you are a hard winning lane and are able to grab Locket at level 8 or even prior to hitting level 8, then your shield is going to be stronger than last patch. So moving on to all the top lane changes now, despite being in a relatively balanced spot right now, Riot will be buffing Garen in 2 different ways for this patch. Q movement speed duration is up in the early game, going from 1 to 1.4 seconds, but it's going to stay the same when you have it fully maxed out. This is actually a pretty substantial buff because you don't max your Q out until second on Garen, which means all throughout lane phase this change helps a bunch. E damage will be increased as well, going from 38 scaling to 50% total AD to 40 scaling to 52% total AD. So definitely not changes that will make Garen an OP top lane pick, but for the majority of ranks in 26.4, he had been just below that S tier threshold, so we're going to be moving him from A into S for this patch. So with Garen being the only traditional top laner changed in 26.5, we won't be seeing a shakeup to the top lane meta. That means we can expect for Ornn and Singed to remain the most consistent carries in the role. 26.4 did end up shifting the priority around for a few different champs, as Illaoi has now settled out as a really strong pick for the lower ranks due to her passive buff. Illaoi's passive scaling was increased, so this is more significant for low elo where games last longer. As a result of the buff, Illaoi is now a top 5 win rate top laner in gold and below, so a really good add to your champion pool right now. Kennen, Riven, and Gwen all ended up getting hit pretty hard by their recent nerfs and are no longer performing very well for solo queue. All 3 of these champs were S tier prior to their nerfs, but you'll now find each of them down in the top lane B tier as lower percentile picks. So with the first pro tournament coming up and being played on this patch, since Lee Sin is not highly prioritized in the current pro meta, Riot wants to try and change that by providing him with a buff to his Q damage. Q damage is going up by 5 at all ranks, so not a massive change by any means, but a small nudge to entice players to pick him back up. For solo queue specifically, Lee has remained a highly prioritized pick, and we've had him placed in the A tier in recent patches. There's an odd chance that this buff could be enough to push Lee into S, but we don't think it's going to be significant enough, so we'll be leaving him in A for now. Lilia is going to receive what Riot are calling buffs for 26.5, however they definitely seem like adjustments more than anything else. Passive monster heal AP ratio is going up from 9 to 15%, Q AP ratio will be increased from 30 to 35%, R is being nerfed with the base damage dropping by 50 at all ranks, and the cooldown is going up by 10 seconds at all ranks. So the fact Riot listed these changes as buffs is pretty interesting, because on paper it doesn't feel like the passive and Q changes will outweigh the R nerfs. I guess it's all going to depend on the situation, because in a really long extended skirmish, maybe the Q damage buff will outweigh the R nerfs, but even if these changes land net positive, we don't see Lilia gaining very much power at all. So for now, we're going to leave Lilia placed in the jungle A tier. Nocturne is the next jungler on the buff list, with his passive cooldown being lowered from 13 to 12 seconds. Q bonus movement speed is going up from 15 scaling to 35% to 20 scaling to 40%. Prior to these buffs, Nocturne had been a good A tier jungler, nothing over the top but not weak weak either, so with these changes coming through, there's a chance he moves up into S. Both the Lee and Nocturne changes are tough to get a read on though, because if they are enough to warrant a move into S, then we feel like they're going to just barely squeeze in since the changes aren't overly impactful. So for the time being, Nocturne will remain in the jungle A tier, but we may look to move him up for the mid-patch tier list. Dusk and Dawn has been by far the best way to build Volibear for Season 16, so Riot wants to try and bring some viability back to AD builds for 26.5. They'll be doing this by buffing Volibear's Q-AD ratio, going from 140 to 160%, and we can see this ends up as only a 5 damage increase when you have Trinity Force completed. W-empowered AD ratio will be buffed, going from 15 to 25%, and from the comparison clips, we can see this ends up being a 4 damage increase on Trinity completion. W mana cost is going down from 30 scaling to 50 to 20 scaling to 40, while E mana cost drops from 60 to 50. So all in all, we really can't see these changes being enough to shift priority off of Dusk and Dawn. If anything, Dusk and Dawn just gets better because of the mana cost buffs, as the damage buffs are just so light that we can't see Trinity Force Rush taking over. As a result, we won't be moving Volibear anywhere on the tier list, so he'll remain placed in A. One of the best solo Q junglers over the past few patches is going to be nerfed, as Kha'Zix will be losing some damage on his Q, with the bonus AD ratio dropping from 110 to 105%. Base movement speed is being reduced as well, going from 350 to 345. Changes do seem quite light on paper, but base movement speed changes always tend to be underestimated by the player base. 5 MS may not seem like a big deal, but when you consider how that affects a champion throughout the entirety of a game, it can actually be meaningful. So we're going to be adjusting Kha'Zix down 1 tier for this patch, dropping him from S into A tier. Taking a look at the jungle tier list for 26.5, the OP tier will continue to be locked down by Briar and Xin Zhao. The jungle meta is in a really interesting spot because there are so many niche picks that have been on the rise lately. Shen and Nasus are 2 picks in specific who are absolutely loving the Protoplasm Harness tech, as they have been rushing the item to a ton of success. Both champs are still extremely underrated though, sitting around 1% play rates at the time of making this video, so the majority of players have yet to catch on to their power levels. XP2 is the Shen main who has popularized Shen jungle, and its success right now could definitely be skewed by the fact it could only be Shen mains playing him in the jungle, but nevertheless, he's excelling at such a high rate that even if this were the case, we're confident his viability as a jungler is legit. For the TLDR on Shen jungle, you build Protoplasm, which is a cheap health option, and because Shen has so much health scaling in his kit, he loves the purchase. You also take Guardian for the Keystone Rune so that your 2v2 or 3v3 skirmish is amplified. Champ plays extremely well into auto-reliant AD fighters like Viego, Briar, and Xin Zhao, as his W can completely counter their damage output in a skirmish. So if you're looking for something new to try in 26.5, then both Shen and Nasus are 2 massive risers lately that are being heavily slept on. After receiving that mini rework back in 26.3, Mel has ended up being around a 47% win rate champ, so Riot has a few buffs planned for 26.5. Q damage is going up from 5 scaling to 9 to 5 scaling to 13, and we can see from the comparison clips that this ends up being a 26 damage increase when you have Q fully maxed and a Blackfire Torch picked up. Our damage is being increased as well, going from 100 scaling to 200 to 125 scaling to 275, and then passive minion mod is being reduced from 60 to 50%. So the damage buffs should actually land quite significant. Mel Q is an ability that you can spam out a ton due to its longer range, so during skirmishes you'll be able to get multiple off, which means a 26 boost in damage per each Q will add up. Do these buffs turn Mel into a top percentile pick? Most likely not, but we no longer think she'll be down in the depths of C tier, as we'll be giving her a push into B for 26.5. Despite Orianna struggling to find success in solo Q, she's been a pro play staple, so Riot will be nerfing her in 26.5, with Q cooldown going up from 6 scaling to 3 seconds to 7 scaling to 3 seconds. So a nerf to the early game bully power of Orianna, as her Q is a spell that you can spam right off cooldown in lane, so a 1-second nerf is actually significant. This change doesn't really affect our outlook on Orianna's power for solo Q, as she's been an average B tier champ for a while, and there's a chance this change drops her into C, but whether she's B or C tier doesn't really matter, as it's a pick you should be staying away from right now. Talia is next in line for a nerf, with her Q base damage per rock dropping from 55 scaling to 125 to 50 scaling to 120. Q bonus monster damage per rock is going up from 20 scaling to 40 to 23 scaling to 43, so a lesser blow to Talia jungle. Similar to Orianna, Talia really hasn't been a top performing solo Q mid laner for this season, as she's definitely being nerfed due to pro play, so as a result of this nerf, she'll continue to be rated lower down on the tier list, placed in B. And then, would it really be a pro focus patch if Azir wasn't included? You can bet that Riot's got a nerf cooked up for Azir, as his health growth is going down from 119 to 108, so nothing new to update in regards to Azir's solo Q viability, as he's been a C tier champ prior to this nerf and will continue to be a C tier champ after it. So the theme of 26.5 is the fact that the meta won't be changing much at all, and mid lane is no exception. Ahri not getting nerfed for this patch is kind of wild, considering her play rate is spiked above 15% while holding a top 5 win rate in the role, so take advantage of her while you can, because we'd be shocked if a nerf doesn't come through in one of the next few patches. Annie is now back in a really good spot after her buffs from last patch, as we moved her into S tier, and she ended up gaining about 1.5% win rate from the changes. If you're someone who likes playing those niche picks that nobody else catches onto, then Kog'Maw mid is that pick right now. He's so strong with Dusk and Dawn as his rush item, as you take PTA for the keystone, put 3 points into E and then max W, and you're melting enemy squishy's health bars by just landing 2 autos from W, since it will proc PTA in 2 autos instead of 3 when you have Dusk and Dawn. Sion mid is another contender for most sleeper mid lane champ, as he's been a top performer all season long and is super easy to succeed with. There's just one ADC being adjusted for this patch, and it's a pro skewed change with lethality Varus losing damage. Q damage is being changed so that the base is down while the AD ratio is being shifted around. If we just have a look at the comparison clips, we can get a cleaner picture of how impactful the nerf is, as Varus Q is losing around 42 damage when you're on your 1-item spike with Q fully maxed out. 42 damage is a pretty massive hit, and there's actually a decent chance that W max on hit Varus could become optimal now. Further incentive for the W max is on the way, with the spell now having a 15% bonus AD ratio. So Q max lethality Varus definitely takes a big hit for this patch, and for solo Q, he wasn't even performing very well prior to these changes. So as a result, we see Varus being one of the weakest ADCs moving forward, as he'll be dropping from B into C tier. So other than Varus dropping down the tier list, the overall meta outlook won't be changing at all from 26.4. There's an update in regards to item priority that we need to talk about though. We uploaded a video last week to our meta updates course on our website, breaking down why Hex Optics is actually better than the Collector on many ADCs. What we found is that DPS wise, Hex Optics is actually more consistent than the Collector if you don't factor in the Collector execution passive. We tested on Caitlyn, Draven, and Twitch, and all of them deal more damage with the standard combo when running Hex Optics. Analytically, Hex Optics is even performing much better than the Collector in solo queue, and this is definitely due in part to the lower sample size of Hex Optics, but based on the testing we performed, it backs up the data. The bonus range that you get on takedowns is really nice from Hex Optics as well, especially on someone like Draven who's shorter ranged. Bloodthirster Rush into Hex Optics second is definitely a core that we'd recommend you try on Draven for 26.5. We think that if you're running this optimal setup on Draven, then he's better than his current overall win rate may suggest, so we're moving him into A tier. We've already mentioned in previous videos how Kate and Jinx are great rushing Hex Optics, but a few others you should play it on as a rush include Aphelios and Tristana. Aphelios literally wins 3% more rushing Hex Optics than he does rushing the Collector, so the Collector's a really bait item on him right now. So like the ADC role, we have just one support champion being adjusted for this patch, and it's Neeko. So Neeko's W is being changed so that the cooldown starts after your clone expires instead of immediately after you throw it out. In other words, it's a 3-second cooldown nerf to Neeko's W, since her clone lasts for 3 seconds after you use the spell. This means that you won't be able to scout for vision as frequently in the mid game with Neeko's W. Exactly how much win rate a nerf like this shaves off is hard to say, but considering it is a 3-second nerf, we see it being somewhat significant, and we'll be dropping Neeko down from A into B tier. Support tier list is going to be looking exactly the same as it was last patch, with Sona and Nami taking home the OP tier spots. The only change that will be of somewhat significance to the support meta in 26.5 is the buff to Locket. Locket as a rush item does become stronger now, so champions who already liked building the item first in recent patches should see a small boost in power. Thresh players were the ones rushing Locket the most in 26.4, so he's the champ most likely to see a positive win rate boost because of the buff. Whether Locket actually becomes more optimal than Bandle Pipes as a rush is up in the air. For example, Leona, who has been loving Bandle Pipes, only had about a 1% better win rate rushing Bandle Pipes compared to Locket over the past patch. So is this Locket buff enough to close that gap so that the items have identical win rates now? There's definitely a chance. So moving forward, instead of blindly rushing Bandle Pipes in every single game on your melee supports, there's probably value in thinking a bit more as to which will provide more early game power. If you're laning up against a very bursty combo, something like Lucian, Nami, or Tristana Nautilus, then access to Locket shield so you don't get blown up instantly is nice to have. On the flip side, Bandle Pipes value goes up if you either think you can just brute force win the 2v2, or if the enemy bot lane duo has less burst threat. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit skillcapped.com and see the difference. So that's going to be all for this one, as this is what the meta will be looking like as we head into 26.5. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.